build what you think you can finish, because a half-finished greenhouse doesn't do anybody any good.
Welcome to Visionary Aquaponics, a podcast dedicated to inspiring a global aquaponics movement for food freedom, water wisdom, and permaculture-inspired aquaponics. Keep listening for the best advice from the world's pioneers and visionaries in backyard and commercial aquaponics. And now, here's your host, Maribou Latour.
So here in New Mexico, it gets really warm in the summer and very cold in the winter. But we have sun year-round. You know, I'm looking into passive solar greenhouse design. In considering our fish, what kind of fish I should use, would you recommend more of a cold-loving fish? Or because I feel like we have both extremes here.
Okay, that's a really good question. And we're going to go take a look at greenhouses now. See, here's the thing about aquaponics. You can't ask a single question about one thing that doesn't have anything to do with anything else. It's all connected. So in answering your question about fish here, I'm going to ask you another question. And it may seem a little bit strange at first. Would you characterize your winters there as clear and cold, somewhat overcast and cold, or very overcast and cold?
Okay, that's perfect because I was going to ask you about passive solar design. So our climate here is very sunny. So no matter what, as cold as it gets, it's still sunny. So that is why I was considering passive solar design for my greenhouse.
Okay, so then what you just told me is you have good sunshine during the wintertime. What that tells me is if you have a properly insulated greenhouse, you can easily run a warm water fish in there. Here's why. Now, if you go back and look at the beginning of this whole earth shelter, solar greenhouse, aquaponics movement, it's something called the New Alchemy Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That was a bunch of PhDs at Massachusetts Institute of Technology back in the 70s. And if you Google it and look for images, you'll see images of these bearded hippie guys in shorts and slippers and T-shirts inside this plastic shelter with a banana tree and 2 feet of snow piled up against it on the outside. We did a class in Tennessee where we literally walked the entire class over to the greenhouse in a snowstorm. And we told them, get ready for this, you know. You're going to have to take everything off when you get inside. We got inside the greenhouse, and there's a fellow transplanting plants in there. He's in a T-shirt, shorts, and slippers. It's 84 degrees inside the greenhouse. And his Carhartts and his big rubber boots are, you know, hanging on a peg on the wall at the end of it. It means you don't run through a snowstorm in your slippers and shorts to get to the greenhouse. But that's how warm that greenhouse was. The water temperature was 74 degrees. The air temperature was 84 in a snowstorm.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's possible with a properly insulated, properly designed greenhouse. There's still a lot of sun coming through even in those situations. And the water in the greenhouse, having a lot of aquaponic water in the fish tank and the troughs, is what's called a thermal mass that acts to stabilize the temperature there because it holds so much heat. It's like a big heat battery. Now, it does same thing but opposite in the summertime. It keeps the cool in. In other words, you get the water nice and cool, it stays cool rather than heating up.
Right. I remember being at a Tennessee training with you at Randy's, and that was in January, actually. I don't remember how cold it was, but those greenhouses were pretty warm, and I remember the passive solar one that you guys had built for him. It was amazing, and I've seen pictures of it in the snow.
So that's possible. And what that also means is that you'll be able to grow throughout the winter because you have plenty of light. See, it's not the warmth, Maribou, that's the problem for wintertime growing. It's how much light you have. You know, you can always burn a little firewood or a little propane or something and keep the greenhouse warm. But unless you have a minimum of 5 really good hours of sunshine a day, your plants won't grow. And your only alternative then is to add supplemental artificial lighting and pay the electric bill for that.
So basically, the question was, does passive solar work for mostly cloudy, extremely cold climates or only sunny climates?
Okay. I'll say it a little bit differently. Passive solar usually works fine, even in a partly cloudy or fairly overcast climate. If you do have overcast periods, you're going to need some source of backup heat, like a rocket mass heater that heats your aquaponics water, a gas heater that heats your aquaponics water, something like that. Here's why. Here's how that works. Let's say you have a 5-day cloudy period. Well, at the beginning of the cloudy period, say it gets cloudy in the middle of the day, and your water temperature is 74, 75 degrees in the middle of the day. It starts cooling off, and at the end of the night, it's down to 72 degrees. It doesn't drop precipitously because there's so much mass that it changes very, very slowly. But you're starting the next day at 72, and it doesn't get heated up because there's no real sunshine. So let's say it's roughly at 72 at the end of that day. At the end of the next night, you're at 70 degrees. Each night, when there's a cloudy enough day, you're going to drop in temperature. At some point there, the water's going to get cold enough that you need to burn something to heat it up. You need to turn on the propane heater or the rocket mass heater or something. So you do need supplemental heat. Now, if you only have occasional cloudy periods that you have to get through, all you need is backup heat. And that gets you through that, because even though the plants aren't growing or aren't growing very much, all you need to do is keep them alive until the sun comes back out, and you can get some growth out of it. If you have prolonged cloudy periods, like a couple, 3 weeks or a month or two at a time, you're simply not going to grow. Your plants are not going to grow without enough light. We even experienced that here in Hawaii. One winter, we had a very, very overcast winter. And you'd go out in the middle of the day and, oh my God, it's bright. You literally had to wear sunglasses, okay? But our plants weren't growing. We just couldn't figure out why. We tested the water and we tested this and we tested that. And right around the second week in February, the sun came out. Now, for 2.5 months, the sun had been out, of course, but it was that kind of overcast where you couldn't tell where the sun was. I mean, you couldn't actually see it up in the sky to point to it. It was just like this big featureless gray thing up there. Mm-hmm. Well, the sun came out. We had little fluffy clouds, and you could see the sun and tell what time of day it was by looking at the sun. And everything exploded. The stuff in the troughs literally exploded. It started growing the way we expected it to grow. And what told us this was the sunlight instead of something else is that about 2 weeks later, the weeds right next to the troughs were almost head high. They'd been getting great watering and everything for 2.5 months, but they hadn't grown either. And this was the first time this happened, so we didn't see this clue, right? Mm-hmm. The weeds right next to the aquaponics system in the soil were not growing at all either. They were all nice and green, but they were all 6 inches tall. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is what taught us that sunlight is critical. It's perhaps the most critical factor in your plants growing well.
So I remember reading something about somebody you knew up in Alaska, which obviously has extreme sun during part of the year and then no sun during part of the year. Have you met anybody who's successfully done aquaponics in a place that has no light like that? Without a lot of supplementation, obviously you probably have to supplement incredibly, and that's a lot of electricity.
You do. Now the Dutch do an awful lot of hydroponic growing under lights, and they have incredibly cheap power. Their power is the equivalent of about 6 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. Now I frequently get this question in our trainings. When is it? Everybody wants to grow in a warehouse or something like that. Now my gut feeling is that somewhere right around 10 cents per kilowatt hour is the break-even point. In other words, if you're going to grow entirely using artificial lighting and you have electricity that costs a lot less than 10 cents a kilowatt hour, in other words, like 6 or 7 cents a kilowatt hour, I believe you could make a very profitable aquaponics business growing under lights in a warehouse. If it's over 10 cents a kilowatt hour, it's the other direction. You've just added one more expense to a business that's already, it's farming. And there are a lot of variables, and you do not want to add more expense to it if you. So unfortunately, right now, the real bottom line here, Marabou, is if you have long, overcast, cloudy winters, you do, unless you're right next to a big hydroelectric dam and you can get electricity for 5 or 6 cents a kilowatt hour, you do not have a good situation for wintertime growing. Now, what may happen, though, is you may have low enough electricity that turning on the lights for 3 or 4 hours a day as supplemental lighting, not as main lighting, and the plants are in a greenhouse getting most of their light from the sky, that may actually be economically feasible. But I would be very careful putting together any kind of an aquaponics setup that relied completely on artificial lighting for growing the plants. A couple of the big failures, that was part of the reason they failed. They set up in warehouses and they had to pay for power for something that's free for anybody who's doing it in a greenhouse.
Yeah, I've known of a few businesses in the Northeast that have failed due to capital running out or improper greenhouse design or just not enough money to run the lights and run all that stuff. I see greenhouse design as being a big part of the efficiency of the entire system. And so I was wondering, is it feasible to go off-grid in a cloudy climate for,
Yes.
growing aquaponically and even commercially? Because I think that's why a lot of businesses went down, obviously bad design and capital investment.
Okay, so first off, even if you have an overcast climate or a cloudy climate, the last thing you want to do is grow inside a warehouse. Why? Because no sun can get inside a warehouse. You can't get any heating from the sun. You can't get any natural light. Now, not having enough natural light is a very different economic situation than not having any. And that's why a lot of these businesses failed, because they didn't have any natural light. If they'd done the same thing in greenhouses and they'd gotten the warmth from the sun coming in and some benefit from the light coming in, even though it wasn't enough light to grow the plants well, that might have made all the difference in the world. Mm-hmm. Now, so you do want to do this in a greenhouse. You're going to get a lot of warmth from the sun, and you'll definitely get some light from the sun that will reduce the amount of electrical lighting you need to pay for. Now, there is one situation that is perfect for off-grid, cloudy climate growing, and that is right next to a rushing stream or river that you can get hydroelectric power from. Hydroelectric is the cheapest form of alternate energy. It's the turbines that are available are the most durable. They require the least repair. They are the least expensive per kilowatt of any of the solutions, from photovoltaic panels to windmills to any of that. Really, really good. In fact, an ideal aquaponic greenhouse would be in the bottom of a canyon somewhere with a little rushing river right next to it. You wouldn't even need a whole lot of light because you could supply whatever light you needed from the hydroelectric power. Other than that, Marabou, there's no magic bullets. Solar is really expensive, mm-hmm. And if it's cloudy, guess what? The solar doesn't do you much good.
So, we're talking about heat and light. Obviously, the water is a huge thermal mass. If there isn't enough sun, can we still use a lot of insulation under the ground of the greenhouse and around the troughs and the fish tanks to make up for the water possibly cooling down and prevent it from cooling down enough?
Yes. Let's look at a human being as an analogy, okay? It's wintertime and you're inside your house. You're wearing a swimsuit. You put on a pair of slippers and you go outside. And what's the temperature outside in the winter? 40, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So you go out into 40 degrees and there's a little bit of wind there and you're out there in your swimsuit and your slippers, right? What happens? You get cold right away because you have no insulation. Now, if it wasn't too cold, you could theoretically eat enough to generate enough heat energy in your body to not die of exposure. But as it gets colder and colder and colder with no insulation, that's more and more difficult. So the very first thing you do dealing with winter, whether you're a human being or a greenhouse, is you put on as much insulation as you can afford. Okay? Forget the heating system in your greenhouse. Spend the money on the insulation. Okay? And the book is full of information on insulation and the drawings and etc. But insulate that. That will keep any heat you do get in there inside. It will also keep any cool you get in there in the summertime inside. And this is a very critical one for people to understand. A lot of people build so-called solar greenhouses, and they are only set up to stay warm in the wintertime. They're absolutely useless in the summertime because they have no systems in them for getting rid of heat. Now, along comes the aquaponics solar greenhouse, right? Now, if you insulate that and you fill it full of fish tanks and aquaponics troughs full of water, you have this insulated structure that's full of a thermal mass. Now, if you get that thermal mass cool, it's going to tend to stay cool in the summertime. And if you get it warm, it's going to tend to stay warm in the wintertime. Now, how we do that in the wintertime is we take the aquaponic water and we simply run it through a solar hot water panel, the same kind that you use for solar hot water heating up on your roof. You can raise the temperature 4 or 5 degrees in a day, and all it takes as far as energy goes is a simple little 40 or 50 watt circulation pump to run the aquaponics water up there, get it heated, and back into the aquaponics system. Now, that's how you solar heat water in your aquaponics. And of course, the aquaponics greenhouse is, because it's open to the sun, is going to heat up a certain amount just from the light, the infrared rays of the sun coming inside. Okay? But you also add heat to the water with your solar hot water heater. This is where you need a backup heater. We talked about a propane or a wood-burning heater here, because if the sun goes behind the clouds for a few days, your solar water heater doesn't work very well.
Right.
Okay? Now, if we've got this greenhouse, it's full of thermal mass, and it's got lots of insulation, and you go through spring, and pretty soon you're not having to heat anything anymore, and pretty soon you come in there and it's actually a little too hot. So you're opening vents, and you're turning on fans, and you're trying to do things that cool it down, but you don't want to spend a lot of money. So you know where the most cold for the least money is? It's about 6 to 10 feet underground. Everywhere in the United States, 6 to 10 feet underground, it's between 45 to 70 degrees year round. And if you run some plumbing pipes down there and run some aquaponics water through them, it picks up that cool and brings it back up to your aquaponics system. This is called geothermal cooling. This is the primary system we use in the summertime for cooling the aquaponics water. And it uses the same teeny little 40 or 50 watt circulation pump.
Yeah, I wanted to convey to the listeners all about, passive solar design and passive cooling. So I'm glad you touched on all those points, as well as renewable energy. So would you talk about how we can integrate other forms of alternative energies to make our systems more efficient? You already talked about geothermal. You talked about solar heating. And you talked about hydro. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, the systems don't require much energy. And we've actually seen locations where the energy cost is very high, such as Hawaii, where installing an off-grid system was actually cheaper than simply buying energy from the utility company. Okay? So there's a lot of good solar energy installers. That's pretty dependable. I'd say be very careful about electric wind turbines, because it always seems like there's more wind than there is, and even the good ones and the relatively modern ones can require a lot of routine maintenance to keep them running. So solar is pretty much it, unless you have a stream on the property.
Okay, great. great. We touched a lot on passive solar design, greenhouse design. We talked about the efficiency of low density and high density systems and appropriate technologies. So I would love for you to talk about the synergies between permaculture and aquaponics and how they complement each other and how they're integrated on your farm.
Permaculture. Okay, this is actually one of my favorite subjects because even with all the time we've spent in aquaponics and all the things we've discovered you can do with aquaponics, we understand how limited aquaponics is. Okay, you're not going to grow a cherry tree in a raft. You're not going to grow a walnut tree. You're not going to grow a banana plant. You're not going to grow potatoes or sweet potatoes. We know, we tried. But we also developed an application with aquaponics where you can use it to develop soil. In other words, to build soil quality where there's very poor soil or no soil. And it kind of goes like this. We planted a couple of banana trees, and we discovered this totally by accident. We planted a couple of banana trees in what we call locally potato rock. This is soil that is rocks the size of your fist that's loosely held together with gravel and sand. There's no dirt involved, okay? And if you hit it with a pickaxe, the pickaxe mostly bounces off. This is how bad quality this is. So I plant these two little banana plants about 100 feet apart. I have to pickaxe holes for them, and I stand them upright gently. They're both about a foot tall, and gently, put rocks around them to hold them upright, and just kind of say a prayer and hope for the best. Water them with the hose and so on. Well, a year and a half later, those banana plants. Oh, and I don't know if you can share photos with your podcast.
I will. Yes, in the show notes, I want to show those pictures.
Those photos. Okay. The little plant had its first bunch of bananas, and it might have had a 3 or 4 pound bunch of bananas. The other one was a banana grove with 10 or 12 main trunks, probably 20 additional, what we call babies, in the process of, sprouting from the root ball. We had already gotten about 600 pounds of bananas from it, and it had another, I would say, 300 or 400 pounds in the bunches it had on it. This was at the end of a year and a half. Now, compared to standard banana growth, that banana tree, if put in good soil, at the end of 2 years, would have had one bunch of bananas weighing about 40 pounds and would have had 3 or 4 babies around it. That's what you can expect in good, fertile soil. So in other words, the performance of this one banana in potato rock was way, way beyond anything that you could have experienced in the soil. Mm-hmm. The reason for that was simply that we had an aquaponics system overflow dumping right out onto the root ball. In other words, every time it rained, the nutrient water from the aquaponics system that overflowed the system ended up going onto that banana tree. Since then, we've performed a lot of other experiments growing things in the ground, and typical results for just about anything, root crops, trees, and so on, is you get growth and production in about half the time you would in normal fertile soil. So simply by watering with aquaponics water. And we've grown things in cinder, volcanic cinder. We've grown them in sand. We've grown them in this rock and in gravel. So what this gives us is a way to take a piece of land that is nowhere usable for farming.
Completely depleted of soil.
Completely depleted. Soil's depleted of nutrients, or it isn't even soil.
It's not soil, it's just rock.
Gravel, rock, and right. Now, and with an aquaponics system to supply the nutrient water, you grow normal crops in that soil. Now, a couple of things happens here. To do that with an aquaponics system, you need a little bit bigger fish tank and maybe double the amount of fish, and you're going to run through more fish food. But if you grew those crops in the ground anyway, you would be buying or making fertilizer. So that expense is canceled out by the expense of the fish food, and you get a crop of fish out of it. So in a way, this is more profitable than simply growing those crops in the ground and buying or making fertilizer. The second thing that happens that we noticed right away with this banana grove was the soil starts developing. These roots were breaking down those rocks. They were tunneling through these rocks and they were pushing, you know how roots push rocks apart and break them, breaking up these rocks. If you dig down there now, it's rich black dirt. This is about 3 years later. So that banana grove has turned an area about 15 feet in diameter and maybe 4 or 5 feet down into fertile soil. In other words, not only does this grow plants, it enriches the soil. There's a whole, there's mycorrhiza, there's bacteria, there's all kinds of worms and bugs and just incredible decay activity going on in there. It's real soil now, 4 years later. So this is a technique that can be used to farm marginal or otherwise worthless farmland and save the good land for other crops.
Yeah, and not only farm bad land, but remediate the soil completely and turn it into good farmland.
Exactly.
That's what I love about this story. When I first did your training and I learned about this was the implications of aquaponics for soil remediation in depleted landscapes is incredible. And that I see as being such a huge benefit to the world at large. If we're looking at turning depleted landscapes back into productive, water retentive landscapes that can grow anything for the future of humanity, I say aquaponics is a pretty good way to do that, to integrate that.
Exactly. And someone who knows a whole lot more about permaculture than we do needs to take this and run with it because it's got so much potential. And if somebody really understands how our aquaponics systems works and experiments with combining that with permaculture, who knows what they might come up with,
Yeah, well, I'm a huge permaculturist, obviously, and I've been studying all this stuff, agroforestry and soil remediation and sustainable water systems. So the idea of just taking aquaponics and applying it to permaculture design as not only a form of productivity for fish and plants, but as a function in the whole system itself to remediate landscapes or to grow the fodder for the animals or biofuels or mulch and biomass and organic matter to throw back on the landscapes to heal them because it can grow so much faster in an aquaponic system if the land's depleted. So I'm looking at it in so many ways, not just for food, but for healing landscapes, biofuels, growing medicine, in any way that I can apply it in permaculture design. This is why I want to get permaculturists excited about aquaponics, because there is a huge question in the permaculture community. Some permaculturists are for aquaponics and some are, hesitant about it. And so I wanted to bridge the gap between aquaponics and permaculturists.
Okay. Well, I have a little metaphor for you that may be useful in helping people understand where aquaponics is right now. Okay? Just imagine your whole life you've been washing your clothes down at the creek. You take them down there in a basket, and you spread them out on a rock, and you beat them with a stick. Okay? This gets the clothes clean, but it's really hard on the clothes, and it's an incredible amount of work. I don't know if you've ever washed your clothes at a creek that way, but I have. It is an incredible amount of work.
No, but I've washed my clothes in Nicaragua in a sink, every day for months. So yeah, I have an idea.
Now, someone comes along and invents a washing machine. Oh my God, a washing machine? You mean something that will do this? It's cold water, it has one speed, and it has a hand wringer, Mary Boo. But my God, it's a washing machine. And you know what they sell the first one for? $5,000. Okay? And people are so excited about the washing machine. Oh my God, look what this thing does, and look at it squeeze the water out when you turn this crank, huge labor saver. Now, of course, that washing machine only costs, $230 to build that they're selling for $5,000, but these people don't know that yet. This is the first washing machine in the world. They're excited about it. That's how people are excited about aquaponics right now, Maribou. And they don't know that that $5,000 backyard hobby system you could go buy the parts for over at Home Depot and Petco for about $500 and put it together yourself with one of our manuals. This is where what you're doing and what we're doing is so valuable to people. If we're spreading good information about aquaponics, you know, those people are sooner or later going to say, $5,000 washing machine? I don't think so. Come on, you know, for $500, I can get one with cold, warm, hot, you know, 8 different cycles, you know, alarms. Right? That's a washing machine, right? You know what to expect in a washing machine. Nobody could sell you a $5,000 cold water hand wringer washing machine now because everybody knows what washing machines are. They know what to expect, right? Nobody knows what to expect from aquaponics. So the shysters are getting away with almost anything. So spreading this information about how to build and operate good aquaponics systems cheaply is one of the most important things we can do to forward the aquaponics movement.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And there are a lot of people selling kits out there and stuff, but not too many who are teaching you how to do it yourself and do it in a way that is extremely energy efficient, that uses the natural cycles of the sun, that uses thermal mass and insulation as part of their design, and that uses it as a part of the bigger picture in their farm, in their landscape, or in their community.
Don't get me wrong, Margot. There's nothing wrong with kits if they're good kits.
Right.
You know, not everybody is excited about picking up tools and doing it themselves, or has the skill, the capability to do that. But if we had good kits, in other words, if that $5,000 kit that's at a 400% markup was selling for $1,200, and they'd come to your place and assemble it for another $300, that's the kind of thing that would really forward the movement. You know, is if we start getting some competition, people start understanding what's what, and the market gets competitive. The $5,000 kit sellers are not going to be able to sell them any longer, or they're going to have to put 5 times as much stuff in them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this whole thing is really shaking out now. There's a lot of shysters, and I think people are starting to get educated so that they're a little more, you know, not suspicious, but they're a little more, you know, critical and careful about buying this stuff.
So what is the biggest mistake you think future aquaponics entrepreneurs and activists should avoid?
Starting big. Starting big is the biggest mistake and is the single largest contributing factor to all of the failures we've seen in the last 5 years, from 100,000 on up to $4 million. The most amazing thing was that $4 million failure, because they used a technology, a proprietary technology that had never been proven to be profitable before. And instead of every single one of those failed ventures, Maribou, could have invested $5,000 and a year of their time and done it small scale and found out this doesn't work. It's not profitable. Now, a number of those could simply have put their numbers in a spreadsheet and found out this is not profitable. They never even had to spend any of that money. What happens is people get excited by the romance of the technology. You know, it's sort of like how everything went crazy at the end of the 90s in that .com bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's getting excited about aquaponics. It's a buzzword, you know, and they're going to put a whole bunch of money into it. Even seasoned business people are doing this. They're not looking for a successful system. They'll spend a couple $1 million on something that's absolutely unproven. Or even worse, they'll decide to design it themselves. And they have no experience with aquaponics or design or building anything, and, you know, so it's their money. Unfortunately, it affects aquaponics. Now, in our training, in our 5-day trainings, one of the most important segments of the training is on the last day, when we show people how to start out with a $2,000 investment. And by building cash flow and building slightly bigger systems, after 3 years, end up with an aquaponics business that's grossing $200,000 a year without borrowing money. without government loans or grants. First off, government loans and grants are a lie. You can't get them for starting out new businesses. They don't exist. Loans, they only loan you money if you already have money and don't need to borrow money. So that's pretty much the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you start small and you have anything wrong with the way your operation is set up or your business plan or your ideas or anything else, imagine starting out small and correcting a $2,000 mistake instead of finding you have the same mistake only you invested $200,000 in it. So we tell people at our courses, and we have people come in there with $200,000 to $500,000, and they're saying, I'm raring to go. I'm going to start on this when I get home. What do I do? We say, build a microsystem. Build this $2,000 backyard system in a little plastic greenhouse and start operating it right away. While you build the big one, but start operating the little one. Because someday there, you're going to have your big one done. You're going to have to plant 28,000 of something the first week and 28,000 of something the next week and the week after that. And the first time you harvest that, you're going to have somewhere you can get rid of 1,250 pounds of that produce, and that all doesn't happen overnight. You need to have experience and knowledge working with that stuff. So starting small and moving slowly is the best way to succeed with large-scale commercial aquaponics. That's the biggest mistake you can make. Think you got it all handled. Try out your ideas. If you're so smart, you're sure you got it handled, try it out at the $200 level. If it works at the $200 level, try it at the $2,000 level, then try it at the $20,000 level. Don't spend $200,000 on something to find out that it doesn't work.
What's the number one thing you would do to minimize your costs while building an energy efficient passive solar greenhouse if you just had $3,000 max?
Okay, that's a very good question. The answer to that is going to depend a lot on what your local building codes are, okay? In many jurisdictions, if you're on agriculturally zoned land, you can build anything except a house without a building permit. And the only thing you need to do is if you put electrical wiring in it, have it done by a licensed electrician. So if you're in that kind of a location, you have all kinds of building options open to you. They're labor intensive and materials intensive, but the materials are cheap. I'm talking straw bale construction. I'm talking adobe construction. I'm talking rammed earth tire construction, although be a little bit careful of that because the tires leach toxics into the landscape if you don't bag them properly, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, any alternate building methods where you live, I mean, my God, you might be able to, mortar a whole wall of empty glass wine bottles together, insulating mortar, and put corks in, and now you have a foot-thick glass insulating wall, right?
That's a great idea. I was going with straw bale, rammed straw bale, but that's a great idea to integrate. Okay, now, the second thing you do is you make it expandable, okay? You lay out your greenhouse, you make it, make it the size you think you can afford, but make it either so that one end has like a double door in it to pass through easily, or is removable so that you can expand the greenhouse in that direction later on. You can double the size or triple the size because these greenhouses get long very easily. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's much easier to extend a greenhouse than to build an entire new greenhouse. So leave room for an expansion. And, build what you think you can afford right now. Here's the other advice I'll give you. Build what you think you can finish. Because a half-finished greenhouse doesn't do anybody any good. A finished greenhouse that is half the size what you wanted does do you a lot of good. Okay? As soon as you get that greenhouse done, you're growing stuff in it, you're growing fish and plants in it, and that is reducing the amount of food bill you have.
I think that's the FedEx, and I think I have to go get it.
Thank you for listening to the Visionary Aquaponics podcast. To learn more about aquaponics, please visit our website at www.visionaryaquaponics.com. There you'll find more strategies, tips, and tricks to get you started in your aquaponics journey.